So welcome everyone to the investigative role-playing masterclass presented by Pelgrane Press. Oh wait, I see Ken. Ken is arriving.
Ken's in the waiting room.
There we go. He's in the waiting room, stuck in there like.
Ken in being fashionably late. Shocker.
Yes. So I'm Robin D. Laws. I'm a writer and game designer, and I am the main designer of the GUMSHOE role-playing game system, which everyone here, I think, asking questions will be familiar with. And we're going to talk about creating mystery scenarios and running, whether we're improvising them or not, mysteries for our players. And we will also possibly talk about writing scenarios for publication if that's what interests people. So we are going to use the hands up system for asking questions. But first of all, I thought I would introduce our panelists and have our panelists jump in and let us know what their main thoughts are about creating investigative role-playing mysteries. And I guess I will throw first of all to Kenneth Hite. Ken, introduce yourself and give us your main tip about creating role-playing mystery scenarios.
I'm Kenneth Hite. I'm the author of Trail of Cthulhu and Night's Black Agents and Fall of Delta Green in the mystery space, as well as co-author of Bubble Gumshoe, which is another mystery game using Gumshoe from Evil Hat. My first thought, core thought on creating mysteries is when you create them for games, certainly, probably in other fields, create them backwards. Don't start with the clues and get to the crime or the thing to be discovered, the monster. Start with the monster and think of that as the center of the pond, and then what radiates out from it, what ripples are going to be visible in your world and to the characters, and then write down all of those ripples that you can stand, and that's a mystery.
Next up, let's hear from Ruth Tillman. Introduce yourself briefly and give us a tip.
Hi, I'm Ruth Tillman. I'm one of the writers from Cthulhu Confidential and a number of scenarios for Trail of Cthulhu, Night's Black Agents, and some monsters. And following on Ken's tip, I think when you're coming up with clues, make them loose and interesting so that you can repurpose them, so that you can move them to a different place, so that you aren't so tied down that you force your players to go to a particular place and do a particular thing or overhear this one little word thing. I've been watching a lot of Murder, She Wrote, and I'm surprised at how much is one little word that they said, is the clue to everything. So keep it loose, keep it interesting, and keep it flexible.
Muted, Robin.
You're muted, Robin, or you're inaudible.
Okay, here we go. I'm trying to do too many things at once. Gar, it's time to hear from you with an introduction and a tip.
I'm Gareth Hanrahan. I write scenarios for lots of people, but mainly Pelgrane. My one tip when doing mystery is to make sure it's not just a mystery. Have some action scenes in there, have some interpersonal scenes in there. Don't make everything about just like gathering clues and doing research. Have some bits where you run around and climb trees and use general abilities, basically.
And Kat Tobin, the publisher of Pelgrane Press, the boss of us all, what would be your number one tip for mystery role-playing?
I had something really good and I didn't write it down, and now it's gone entirely out of my head.
So tip one is write things down.
I guess my tip is always write things down. Yeah, I mean, people have said some great things. I think always kind of understand that things that seem really easy and obvious to you won't necessarily seem easy and obvious to your players, right? So make sure, as Ruth said, that you have a couple of different ways of getting that same information for when they invariably don't pick up the newspaper that you go into great detail describing in the very first scene. which gives them their follow-on clue.
One of the main mysteries plaguing me at the moment is how why Zoom is behaving differently than it did the last time. So I'm going to lead off, though, with a general observation about the challenge of creating mysteries, which is that the story has to make sense in two directions. That you need to find a thing that the often people, sometimes creatures, have done. You have to find out what they're doing, why they're doing it, why it's mysterious, and what they've gotten up to before the investigators arrive, and why it all makes sense. Because and so you have a story that goes back into the past and makes sense in that direction, but also shows you how the investigators are going to come at it from the other direction. So their storyline, you have to see how they're going to progress through a series of clues to solve a mystery that unravels a story that goes in the other direction. And you both have to have the logic of how are the investigators going to get from the beginning of the adventure to where the leads are, how they're going to sort that out, what questions they're going to ask. And then once they ask all those questions, all of those things have to make sense in retrospect, because otherwise the investigator's not going to be able to figure things out. You also ideally want the players who have mostly figured everything out by the time they get to the final scene, and then find some kind of surprise. So if they're just sort of stumbling around in the dark or being led from one scene to another without really understanding what's going on, and then at the end someone shows up and explains, oh yeah, this happened and this happened and this is why this is doing, oh, and I did this because of that, and also because of this, it's unsatisfying. That you have to give the players a sense of urgency in what they are doing. At this point, I'd like to throw it open for questions. And last time I did this, I had a hands up feature that I could activate, but I am not.
I can see it in the participants list.
Okay, participants. So is this something we can activate, or?
No, if you click on participants, I see Kat and Samuel Tyler and James Holloway have their hands up.
Oh, there we go. They have their hands up. Excellent. There we go. I guess it was just something I had to wait for other people to do. So Samuel Tyler, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or advice about building scenarios with characters with supernatural powers in mind, like empaths or psychics, without making it frustrating to neutralize their abilities and letting them have a chance to still be challenged.
Garth, this is a question that comes up in Mutant City Blues. So you've recently worked on this second edition of Mutant City Blues. So I bet you have a great answer for this.
Yeah, the first thing you'd want to consider is this a setting where empaths or telepaths or whatever are commonly known and people can either counter their abilities or would take account of their abilities when committing a crime, or is it something where the player is the one actual psychic in the world or one of very few? Because the second setup is much harder to deal with. Like if the bad guys can't, if you have some investigative tool the bad guys can't counter or don't know they should be countering, then it'd be that's sort of a power tool for solving mysteries. But the first thing to do is basically sort of nail down what the power can do and what its limitations are, and then basically work from there. If this classic thing, if you recite a nursery rhyme or something over in your head, and it's surface thoughts that block where you're trying to hide. Can people do something like that? If the empath has to touch you, maybe the bad guy wears gloves all the time. Basically, nail down the rules of the power and then try and work around them.
Yeah, one of the balance you need to strike is between having a power that gives you something, that leads you in a direction, but that doesn't tell you everything. And in fact, that's actually the same principle behind every investigative ability in a role-playing game, is that you don't want the flood of answers to come in. I read the guy's mind and I know everything there is. So you have to create a world where you can sort of get a glancing bit of memory from someone if you really focus. And so instead of getting the whole story by completely sifting through someone's mind as if it's a laptop that you've stolen, that you, the power works so that, oh, you get a glimpse of a strange statue of a fish, and there's a street with cobblestones on it. And then that's enough where you start, okay, well, let's find the cobblestone fish street. There must be something of interest there. And that's actually the same principle that happens when the characters literally get a hold of someone's laptop, is they don't get every single possible answer to the mystery in one go, but you get one important clue that leads you somewhere, or maybe two that gives you a choice of different options to pursue.
Another thing is that
James Holloway, you have a question for us. Oh, sorry, Ken, go ahead.
I was just going to say that this is part of designing the mystery, is that if you know that you've got a telepath in the party group, you don't want to design a mystery that can be short-circuited by that telepath, regardless what their power structure is. And maybe the telepath it can solve tons of mysteries, and that's a standard thing that you've done over and over again. You come to the town, he figures out who killed the bartender last night with his telepathy. Everyone's happy, and then that's how they always get to be friends with the authorities. But in this one case, the one that's your change up, the one where the murder is the center of the story, not whatever they were actually there to do in the town. The murderer is a werewolf, and he turns into a wolf. He doesn't know he turns into a wolf. He kills people as a wolf. He comes back as a person. Telepathy says, nope, he was asleep all night. That's what he remembers. And then you can telepathically, like, mind the eyewitness, and the eyewitness is like, he was killed by a big dog. It wasn't a person at all. And it's like, well, that's odd that a dog would be able to get in here. And then more information can come out telepathically from eyewitnesses, and even from the guy who was a werewolf. If you telepathically regress him all the way to the time that he walked through the forest on a full moon, and he didn't bring his silver-headed cane that one time, then you're like, oh, okay, and that gives you the clue. But when you're building a mystery, you have to build it so that, if a mystery can just be solved by cigar ashes, Sherlock Holmes solves it in the first page. He's like, oh, it's the guy that smokes some Villa Villars. That's that guy. Arrest him. Well, that was good. Come on, Watson. We can catch the matinee. That's not what happens in a Sherlock Holmes story. And Sherlock Holmes has superpowers of a sort as well. So you just make sure that the story that you're focusing on highlights, but does not short circuit based on the guy's play on the guy's powers.
I think too.
Panelists, is there? Oh,
yeah. Sorry, but just building on that. If you're building, even on the idea that you could have a person take them, interrogate them, sift their brain, make the mystery about figuring out how to get your hands on that person, or something like that. So if you can't telepathically sense everybody in the world at all times, which would be a terrible power to have and would overwhelm you and you'd go crazy and everything else. So it's good that your character has limited stuff. So even then the problem could be, if you want a person who's really powerfully telepathic, it's hard to get your hands on a person, to get them into the right situation, to get them to relax enough to get into their brain. So even then you can think of the problems of just getting to the person that would have the answers as some of the challenge.
James Holloway, you have your hand up.
Thank you. So mystery scenarios, like kind of traditional action scenarios, oftentimes they're not just in another setting from kind of a contemporary one, but they sort of actually are in what we might think of as another genre. So, a post-apocalyptic mystery, or a pirate mystery, or a superhero mystery. These are all things that kind of come with their own genre conventions. So when you're writing a mystery scenario that sort of interacts with a new genre, one that you haven't written a mystery in before, what are the kind of, where do you start? What are the things that you look for in terms of establishing, how do I make a mystery work in a way that sort of aligns with you know, the givens of this other thing as well.
Well, one of the tricks is that a lot of things that we think of as being other genres are, as they are commonly presented, especially on television, are mysteries already. And so they're the narrative structure of we have to find something out and then do something about it is basically almost every episode of The Flash or Arrow or any of the CW superhero shows are like that. The X-Files and Supernatural, they're all, you know, sometimes in Supernatural you can see it because the role-playing fingerprints are on that one, and you can see, you know, you can see them doing their library use roles and so forth. Even Star Trek, of course, it's figure out what this anomaly is and then have a moral dilemma about it often. So usually it's a question of seeing what the structure of that is, and the underlying chassis is almost always already a mystery. So the question then is, if you have a genre that typically isn't like that, you know, say pirates, we don't think of swashbuckling as a mystery genre, but you would then have to find some other analog. For example, what other show do we have where people go around in a ship encountering things, finding out what the weird thing going on the planet or island is, and then deal with the moral dilemma or treasure that we have to steal on the planet. And so these structures are sort of already in place, and you only very rarely have to tweak them more than a little to identify what's going on with them. Any serialized adventure has a mystery component of some kind almost.
Yeah, I think that another kind of aspect to that is that people get, I think people get very caught up in genre, in like making things more genre. So if you're doing something in sci-fi, they're like, oh, everything has to be sci-fi and I have to have new names for everything. And actually, often, like, there's, you know, when you're dealing with people, whatever those people are like, they still have a lot of the same concerns and habits as we do, just twisted in a slightly different way. So I'm sure that one of the others here has some kind of a ratio or like normal things to abnormal things. But I actually just finished reading Robin's novel, The Missing and the Lost for the Yellow King last night. So that's kind of in my mind, because what he did there was, like, a lot of it reads like it could be any period, but then every now and again there's just one little thing that reminds you that it's actually a genre, more of a genre setting. So, you know, pick your elements and focus on those, and then understand that the rest of the concerns and the way people go about things and how they live their life is still going to be fundamentally the way that we do. It's not going to be that different.
One thing I do when I'm saying, if I'm like, you're doing a mystery for the first time in a genre setting I'm not familiar with, is sort of run through the really common tools that show up in almost every scenario. Like in lots of mystery games, you're going to be asking questions to people. Do the characters have like authority to ask questions? Are they like, you know, empowered to do so, or do they have to sort of like, you know, be sneaky about it or force people to answer questions just through intimidation? You're going to have like dead bodies. What level of like forensics is common in the setting? What's the equivalent of library use? Is it literally go to the library? Is it some high-tech like library data thing in Star Trek? Basically take a wholly conventional, like, you know, murder show as mystery, and sort of just imagine how they will play it in that genre, because that'll give you some idea of the tools and approaches the players will take, and then you can sort of start highlighting the unique bits of that genre. Like when running and writing stuff for Yellow King, where like in some of the settings there are abilities my players certainly would often rely on that aren't present in that setting. Like architecture isn't an ability in the wars, is it, Robin, from remember? So, you know, I would often have like architecture-based clues, and it's because they're not available in the wars, I basically need to adapt the mysteries to that, and that gives you a feeling of how to how that genre differs from regular ones.
Yeah, so in the wars, the architecture has all been blown up. So
That's
you're
true.
probably using your terrain ability
Exactly,
to find
the
out
rubble.
or history or something like that.
Yeah.
One thing I did before writing for Cthulhu Confidential was, and this also is because I was writing and so the stakes were higher, but I read about 15 noir novels and watched about 25 noir films over a 3-month period, which I don't recommend, actually. It's a little much, but
I'd recommend it.
it's real dark, Ken. It got real dark. It started in November too. It was a rough patch.
There's your problem.
I wonder why that genre is called noir. I wonder if there's a tip.
But it really helps you get some of the common flavors when you are mentally sort of aware of a genre but haven't delved into it. I'd approach Star Trek very differently because I'm on my 4th, I think, rewatch of DS9. So I think consuming media and doing it intentionally to say, what are the big tropes, aspects, and elements, and how can I bring them into this story to make people feel like they have enough flavor, so that you're not just writing, say, Cthulhu type things in the 1930s, but it really is noir. And what does that twist mean? That was because I'd written for Trail of Cthulhu before, and so I had to figure out how to add that extra in.
Wayne Rossi, you have a question.
Yeah. So it kind of came out of that, the sarcastic, like, write things down. When you're setting out and you're not writing a full-length Gumshoe adventure, what are the core things? Like, I know you have core clues and NPCs. What else do you write down? Like, if you're just running an adventure at home, like, what would you... How do you sort of structure that for this kind of adventure?
I mean, if you're doing it in play, how much you write is absolutely dependent on what makes you comfortable as a game master. Because I don't write anything. I just know the story and keep it in my mind when the players are interacting with it. And occasionally, yeah, I get, caught up because I made up an NPC 2 sessions ago and now I've forgotten the name of the bartender or whatever. But my players will, chime in and remind me, or they'll say, no, that wasn't Hector. Hector was the stagehand. The bartender was Arturo or whatever. And so we'll figure it out. And everyone, but that's my table, and other tables will be different. And if you are the kind of person who maybe doesn't have players who will keep Hector and Arturo separate, you might want to write both of those down just in case. I think that the core things you need to know are means, motive, and opportunity for every suspect, just so that you can leave clues to those 3 things. That's how you determine who did it in a mystery novel. It's not how you determine who did it in real life, but who cares about real life? And so you know that a demon was summoned to kill a guy. So means you have to say who's got demon summoning impedimentia around, and who's got the training, and who was outdoors at midnight, for proper demon summoning, whatever it is. You establish that information for all of the suspects that you care about. And then in theory, that and their name and maybe a little role-playing note is all you need, because all you're doing is sort of pointing the players toward clues or toward absence of clues, eliminations of suspects, until they realize, oh, it was Hector all along, the bartender, or was he the stagehand who summoned that demon and killed those people. And what you're doing is you the more you write down in script, the bigger the temptation to force the players to find it and to have that moment, because you wrote it down. Now it's important. And that, I think, is a bigger problem in play. And again, maybe this is just my table. That's a bigger problem in play than getting Hector and Arturo confused is, right? If you're like, no, they haven't gone to the quarry. We all have to go to the quarry. And they're like, we don't want to go to the quarry. The quarry is stupid and it seems dangerous. And we're pretty sure that whatever happened to the quarry, it doesn't really bear on what happened in town. We're not going to the quarry. And if you bully them into going to the quarry or lure them there with a clue that only points back to town, they're going to be angry and resentful. So I would say if the players are eager to go to the quarry because they've been brought up and bullied by Doctor Who all their lives, sure, go out to the quarry. But if they don't follow the players and find out what clue is already waiting for them when they get to where they're already going. That's the secret of this kind of play, is to make the players motion through a story organic and independent, while still having them going through a pre-existing structure, a maze or a labyrinth or whatever you want to call it, that is the nest of clues, either following the trail of clues or just encountering enough information that they can get a gestalt of, oh, it's Hector, because he's a demon worshiper. We get that now.
Yeah, I mean, I when I actually prep games for my own group, it's like a page of notes tops, and half of that is going to be like, random names of NPCs if I need to run the spur of the moment, or like, if like things get boring, I need to sort of like throw a monster in or throw some exciting encounter. Here, like, 6 interesting, what's the like bangs, the Ron Edwards term, to throw in the middle of play. But what's far more important, I find, is after the game, writing up a fairly detailed description of what happened. So the players remember for next session, because they've like memory of goldfish, what they discovered and what's going on. And also I know what they know, because I have like the whole mystery in my head, or like the big whole vague idea of the campaign in my head. But I need to recall have the players worked out that the mayor is the bad guy, and so I send them fairly lengthy text messages or WhatsApp or emails going, here is what happened in this session, and I was all like,
your players, Gar.
It's good for me as well, because I'm terrible at NPC names. The bad guy in my current Traveller campaign has changed name 3 times. We've played 3 sessions.
Well, he's in the future people do that, as Kat will tell you.
It's 3 different guys. He kept dying during character generation.
Right.
What I write down are the names of the characters and what they know and what they want. And what they know is often just covered by what they want, so that's implicit. So and that can be a very simple beginning ground for a mostly improvised mystery. But it sorts out, why are all these people there? Because I know that once the players arrive in this environment, or the characters do, the players are going to, well, we need to talk to the boss of the camp. We're going to look for the weird hunter guy who's out in the woods. We're going to, the hotel keeper, we're going to ask them questions. And so I think of the obvious people they're going to want to talk to, assign them names, motivations, and what knowledge they have. If, however, I'm writing something that or running something that has a historical aspect to it, like I just finished wrapping up a case that is based on the real life RCMP mole story that you may have heard on Ken and Robin a few weeks ago. So I had a much longer point form version of all the real facts of that story, so that I had them at my fingertips if I needed to reach for them.
Yeah, I have more experience.
Ruth, what do you prep?
No.
Sorry, Kat.
Sorry, I wasn't waiting to be called on. I was just like getting right in there. So I'm more experienced from the opposite perspective, from people giving me adventures. So just from that perspective, what I'm usually looking for to get a sense of the outline, to get a sense of what the adventure is like, is generally speaking a list of the clues that are in the adventure. So like the kind of the points that will that the players need to get to move the action forward, and how the action kind of how it progresses on from clue to clue. So I'm kind of looking for like an outline of those clues, and I think another thing that I found is useful for writers as well is to note down which investigative abilities can be used to get those clues. And Brian Durrell recently wrote a really good article for our website about this. And what he did when kind of coming up with the Yellow King RPG adventure was he basically went through the list of investigative abilities and then created clues that related to those. And with that, like Ruth was saying earlier, that means that your clues are a lot more free floating, and they don't have to go to the quarry to get the clue about the stone. You know, they can get that from, if they want to go to the bar instead, or if they want to go up to the, you know, the caretaker of the graveyard or whatever, they can still get that vital clue about the stone using that ability in any location. So it helps you to kind of condense what the important information about the adventure is, and how they can kind of get to it. And I think that as well, like going back to what Garth said about kind of remembering things for your players, like I think that's particularly important if you're running a one-to-one game. So if you're running a game with like one player and one GM, because of the way the intensity and the spotlight works in that game, it can be a lot more difficult to, you don't have that group remembering facility essentially. So it's a lot more important, I think, for you as a GM to be remembering what your player is doing, so that you can remind them of what they've done and what they haven't done, and the fact that they still need to go and help Mickey Cohen.
I think the only thing I would add to that is that if you happen to be running at a convention, which I've done in the past, and sometimes you'll be running the same scenario like 4 times or 2 times. And under those circumstances, I really recommend sort of having a kind of checklist of some of the major clues and how you get to places, and sort of just keeping your own notes as you go, because what Gar had said about having the whole scenario in your head, the whole big arc, it's even more so when you're on your 3rd group of the con and you're just trying to remember, okay, have they talked to the old lady yet? Oh wait, no, but not the other old lady. Crap, why did I put 2 old ladies in this? What am I doing here? But yeah, they haven't talked to the old lady that lives in the library. They've talked to the one at the rooming house. So just kind of coming up with the high points of information, at least, and maybe a note about how they get them, is really, I found it really helpful when you are in a situation where you have to sort of run and rerun something and not blank out on your players.
Will Logson has a question for us.
Hey guys. Yeah, so I'm running a Trail of Cthulhu scenario coming up, the Appalachian Trail of Cthulhu, and it involves different, yeah, right, got to throw the pun in there. It involves, a lot of the labor disputes that happened in the 30s down in Kentucky, specifically Harlan County. Anyway, the players have the opportunity to play on either the side of like labor union organizers, or, coal company executives, or the National Guardsmen sent in. And a lot of times they're going to have conflicting motivations at first. And I know that can be a lot to juggle, but, have you had any experience of working in that whole trope of the superheroes fight first before they realize the true threat is, this villain over here, and then they team up? Have you had a lot of experience with that, or is that just a lot to juggle? Because it's the only aspect I haven't yet to crack as far as this scenario is going.
Is this for a con game or a campaign?
It's for a campaign that's going to meet weekly on Discord. So my idea so far has been that, there might be different sessions where we meet for an hour for the, the Union separatists to plan a sabotage, or the coal executives can go through the books, at the coal company or whatever. And then they can kind of meet up together at, say, like a negotiation to work out the union workers' contracts or whatever. My big thing is, I feel like inevitably they're going to be kind of turning on each other, not wanting to trust each other. It's, how do you get to that moment where, oh crap, it's the monsters from in the coal mine or whatever. Yeah, without, showing your hand too early as far as that goes.
I ran a similar campaign many years ago where there were different factions of player characters, and they did sort of hour-long plot with each faction before the sort of the group game. And I found that because players get so invested in player versus player stuff, that what ended up happening was the equivalent of the coal company executives going, if we feed the striking miners to the serpent folk, that'll get rid of that problem. That it's hard to get external threats to bond the players together if the players are far more invested in beating the other players than in deal with the monsters. So I think the one thing is make sure the monsters can threaten everyone equally. Like if the coal executives can basically bugger off back to Washington, and leave the poor miners to get eaten, then they're going to do that. So yeah, make sure that everyone has a reason to sort of invest in saving the day and teaming up, as opposed to having some people able to just flee.
Within GUMSHOE, I would say probably the best mechanic to use on this is to combine or supercharge drives with why would you team up with a stupid worker or a jerk boss, right? Why would you, not just your drive to find out mysteries, but your drive that is specifically, why would you do the thing that you want the scenario to be about eventually? And give them, tell them internally they have to come up with a reason. Maybe the coal guys grew up in Kentucky and they need to be able to show their face in the county if their sister's going to be able to live happily there. And maybe the union guys, they can't just walk out on a strike because all their families will starve, and so they have to make a deal with the coal company at some point. And you just make sure that every player knows why they are going to do the other half of the scenario when it comes time to do that. And like drives in Trail, it may just be that the act of writing that on your character sheet is enough, and then they'll role play toward that. But if it isn't, then that's when you can do, your charging stability. Oh, you're so distracted thinking about your sister having her house shot at by passing drunks that you're not able to concentrate in this moment. You don't get the pension clawback that you were trying for. That's too bad. Maybe if you'd given a little bit, you wouldn't be so nervous, or whatever it is. I think drives are the way that you sort of force story optimal but not autarkic play on players. And so if you're trying to do that again, just either supercharge the existing drive or add a community drive or an alliance drive or something that you want to call it, that will be the reason that they're not going to turn this into let's get the government inspector to go down the mine first session.
And it's notable that in genre, the thing that happens when the mine executives and the union workers and other people at cross purposes are down in the mine with a monster is they squabble and the monster eats them. So that's what would happen in the source material as well. So there has to be a really strong moment where they all collectively realize that none of them are getting what they want. But again, the players may, because it's the trope, they may want to play that their characters are obstructive fools who get devoured. So they may feel that it's leaning more into genre to not do that thing. So you have to, I think, not only provide a reason for them to get together, but an obvious reward that comes out of that, so that whatever it is, that there's something they both want, that they need to cooperate together, and that their mere survival is going to be treated as mere survival by the players, because that's what the genre will tell them to do.
Yeah, I think another aspect of that as well is an expectation management thing. So I'm not sure from what you've said if it's going to be a kind of a bait and switch where you're going to spring the fact that there is the Cthulhu mythos kind of stuff going on them partway through or not. But if not, if they're going to know about that going in, then I would say really kind of laying that on the table in the session 0, right, which is your kind of, it's become the trendy term for your kind of pre-game kind of planning session, where you kind of map out expectations and you talk about how the game's going to go and what everyone wants from it. And I think that you can very easily do it in that by laying it on the table and saying, well, this is my concern. I'm a bit worried that, you'll all just continue to squabble. And people have been saying this on social media at the moment, how they always thought that in these post-apocalyptic situations, this kind of idea of the kind of partisan squabbling kind of still continuing in the face of this greater threat was really unrealistic. And now they're all kind of realizing that no, actually that's exactly how we would be.
Turns out Alan Moore wasn't cynical enough.
No, yeah, who knew, right? But yeah, so I think if you can, if you're not kind of doing it as a surprise, there's the mythos kind of idea, then kind of just being honest with your players and saying, look, this is kind of what I'm hoping, this is the way I'm hoping it'll go, that, you know, you'll play through this kind of social dynamics kind of aspect of it first, but then everyone will like all come together again when the big squigglies hit.
So Daniel Horila, you have your hand up.
Yeah, test. I've had two kind of issues that's been coming up when I'm running like longer, more sandboxy investigative horror campaigns. And one of them is that, for example, when I was running Eternal Lies, my players found out the big bad, or like revealed the big bad too soon. And in the other one, which is the Yellow King, which I'm running right now, my players don't understand what the hell is going on or even where to go next. So I'm wondering, like, how do you kind of reward your players for being good detectives at the same time as keeping things suspenseful in a longer campaign? In other words, how do you pace it when your players start to figure it out at a too early point?
So the problem is they'll either figure it out too early or they'll be completely lost.
Yeah.
And so we're looking for the middle ground between those
Basically,
two things.
How do you pace a more sandboxy investigation campaign where you want to kind of maintain the mystery?
Well, for the second problem, the one of them being confused, I will guide the players, and my players are often will sort of focus on something that surprises me. I will just, as GM, I will just continually review. So you have this option, or this option, or this option, or you discuss this, or you discuss that. And I'm just repeating to them the things that they've mentioned as possibilities. If there are no possibilities that they've mentioned and they're just completely confused, I would then go the extra step and say, as seasoned investigators, or in the case of the Yellow King, as perspicacious, plucky art students who have the American drive to go forward into this strange situation in Paris, I would then, sort of point them a bit toward the answers. But there's the other problem of what happens if they solve the mystery too quickly. Gar, how would you handle that?
You're muted, Gar.
When running a long investigative campaign, I think one thing you sort of have to do, and it's something I struggle with myself, is making sure that it's built up as a sort of series of, not necessarily self-contained investigations, but like you have sort of some degree of like episodic nature to it, or like sort of they're like the players kind of feel they're making progress. That it's not all one giant, huge epic mystery. There are like individual subsections, and they can make progress and solve like subplot A, which sheds light on the big bad, and that then you can sort of see how much the players are making progress and what direction they're making progress in, and if they're getting too close to figuring things out too early, you can throw in more subplots ahead of them, or throw them like a lead that takes them off on a tangent for a while. The other thing is to like, avoid having campaigns that turn on one terrible revelation, or at least if there is one terrible revelation, then make sure the second half of the campaign is what they do about it, as opposed to just like having solved it all. The other sort of side note is, in my experience of the Yellow King anyway, which isn't like massively extensive, I think the power section is always going to be like the players wander around going, "What the hell is going on? This is all weird. Let's like drink lots of absinthe and like hope it all goes away." And it's in the later episodes where you start building on the stuff that's come up in Paris that they begin to work out, oh, hang on, there is some structure to this. It's not a random barrage of alien horrors. There is like a terrible malign will at work.
I think that with something like Eternal Lies, where the mystery, quote unquote, is the hideous force behind all this. The solving of the mystery doesn't end the danger. There's still, the cult and all of the other ramifications happening throughout the world. And what may happen if you're running a Trail of Cthulhu campaign and they discover halfway through that, oh, it's Shub-Niggurath, she's behind it, then that didn't fix it. They didn't make Shub-Niggurath go away. Now you're running the equivalent of a mafia movie where you're the FBI and you figured out, oh yeah, the mafia was behind it. Well, that problem solved. Oh no, that's not solved at all. You're doing the Untouchables. I think Al Capone may be behind all this crime. Well, we still have to go bust up all the bootlegging and shoot guys and get attacked by angry dudes with Tommy guns. So it becomes a thriller, if I may plug Night's Black Agents, in which, yeah, you know who the bad guys are. They're vampires. What are you going to do about it? And you still got to figure out in any given town who's the Shub-Niggurath cultist. Is it the garden store? Is it the druids? Is it the taciturn old guy with an awful lot of mysterious female servants in his house? Which of these is the Shub-Niggurath cult? And you have to go after it. And maybe it's all of them, maybe it's one of them, maybe it's none of them, maybe it's some other thing. And that becomes the ongoing story. And the reward is you're not confused. You know who the bad guy is. You get that focus and that attention. And maybe you start, gathering up special mythos herbicide or whatever to go after Shub-Niggurath. And that's your reward, is you're a more effective fighter of evil, but you're still in Trail of Cthulhu. You're still going to get, eaten or drowned or set on fire or subsumed into a tree.
Yes, I think, and I just saw Will's antagonist reactions also are a good way to keep players from learning too much too soon, like as they get going. Okay, how do the people respond to that? And I think I think one of the problems when people are going too soon is you worry about how to keep the stakes up. And so I think one of the ways that you could work with that is, okay, if you figured out and internalized that there are several cells across the world, and maybe you've even, and what's causing it, and like you've even figured out maybe that some are in Hong Kong and one is in Toronto. What happens if you go to Hong Kong and you don't take out the one in Toronto, right? Does beloved writer and game designer Robin D. Law, is he lost in this horrible like thing? Or, so what are the consequences? So you can still raise stakes and tensions by again having that more broadly scaled antagonist reaction. Like, great, you go to Hong Kong and now they really know that you're onto you because you didn't just arbitrarily take out a cell. You went, you solved small mystery. Who are the people? You solved next small mystery. What do they want? You solved next small mystery. How do we destroy it? And then hopefully you destroyed it. And now all the other cells are onto you. So what does that mean? And I think coming from the flip side with the Yellow King thing, I think a lot depends on what your players don't know and what they're not getting. Part of me says, oh, break it down into bite-sized chunks again. Like, who are they? What they want? Those kinds of things. But I do know that sometimes players can feel really adrift if they don't have that taste of the big picture. So I think as long as they have a taste of the big picture, having them respond to everyone and everyone responding back as they now know that the players are onto their arc can be still give a lot of tension, stakes, and mystery as you go.
Yeah, I think that players really need to feel like they're making progress, right? It's like, it doesn't matter if they're still, years and years away from actually resolving the issue once they've got those small wins and once they are achieving those things. And I would definitely look to TV show formats, right? They're, with most TV shows that continue on, like most series-based TV shows, they're continuing on for years with essentially often the same basic premise, and look at how they're kind of dealing with the episodic win for the characters, or the episodic moving the action forward versus the big seasonal kind of arc. And then look, when you're kind of, before you prepare one of these big campaigns, like look at how you'll kind of break it down into those, into the episode versus the season versus the entire series kind of plot. And just, yeah, in terms of giving information away. Like that's literally what investigative abilities in GUMSHOE are designed to do, right? You know, you can always say, well, because you are really good at architecture, right? You spot that this building is going to collapse at any minute, or you know, you see that somebody has done some damage to it or whatever. You know, you can always kind of spoon feed them information through the investigative abilities, because that's literally what they're there to do.
And when in doubt, have someone come through the window with a sword cane, and there's a clue in their pocket after they beat them up. There's some other mystery writer that said something like that. Next, we have Chad Ward.
Hey, folks. I run mostly one-shots and con games. And so I was wondering what the 5 of you consider the must-haves, the essential elements of an investigative one-shot.
I want to cheat and go first on this one, because my must-have thing for any investigative convention adventure is Gareth Ryder-Hanrahan's trademarked "How to Run This Adventure in 5 Minutes." And this was a thing that he came up with because very often at our conventions at home here in Ireland, people like him would be grabbed and put down in front of a table of 6 people and handed an adventure and told to run it. And it's honestly a fantastic tool because it maps out all of the key points of the adventure. You know, like literally it's like a précis of the entire thing and how it's supposed to go. So even if you don't have time to read through the whole adventure, you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing with those players.
What I look for is an introductory moment that's going to get them in trouble right away, so that there's enough time for the players to get a sense of who the other characters are and maybe create a dynamic and then riff with each other, and then things go sideways pretty quick. And if that's something happening to them rather than them making a choice and deciding which of 3 things to do, as I would prefer to do in a longer format, that's actually all to the good, because it's about compressing it and about getting to the fun, and in this case, mystery and danger, as fast as you can. So it's sort of like think of it as a little porch that they all gather on, drink some cocktails, and then there's a slide that sends them down into the adventure.
And I see my internet connection's a little unstable. But one thing I have done particularly for con games is skip the opening 2 scenes if you're using a pre-generated adventure or something like that. Like, you're not getting the info. Like, you have arrived in this town to solve this problem, and then maybe we do something too, like we all do a flashback of what were you doing right before we started this. You know, what was either the last job you worked on together, or you know, what problem did this pull you away from, or a little something to do character stuff. But it's not, okay, you're all in New York and a guy comes to you and this and this, and you get on the train. No, you have arrived in the town, and yeah, tell me about how you were approached, or something quick like that, and then go forward. And I try to keep those fairly tight. And then sometimes I have done this too, where particularly for new players at conventions, if people have not played GUMSHOE before, I have this like pre-written one scene that's a fight that's like, you know, you arrive in this town and it's the first time you've all been together since that time in 1918 when you were doing this, and it's fighting a Shoggoth in the sewers under Paris. And it lets people like sort of, here's the person setting off the thing with the explosives, because there's explosives in this scenario, and getting a feel for how that works, and then feeling for fleeing, feeling for explosives, feeling for monsters, and it establishes that they have this previous relationship. And I have done that, and it can be fairly successful, and I hand out all the, you know, how to fight in GUMSHOE cheat sheets, so that way when we do get it to a big climactic fight, everybody's had that experience before. And I think that can be really helpful at conventions. It's fine to learn as you go, but dropping people into a fight, if there's going to be like 2 fights in a whole scenario because you're only there for 4 hours, getting something up front can be a little helpful.
I'd say have something that spotlights the game or spotlights your greatest skill as a game master. Again, the convention scenario exists so that people can get all the fun of that game in a relatively constrained time and space. And you don't have time for it's like you watch a television show and it's terrible. And everyone says, oh no, yeah, the first 6 seasons are really bad, but then by season 8, it takes off. It's like, we don't have time for season 8. This is a convention scenario. This has got to be a killer 44 minutes with commercials of awesome spaceships and detectives and cat girls and whatever it is that happens in your game that is great. Make that happen at the table. Don't think like like you're ever going to see these people again. This is your one chance to convert them to the awesomeness of the game and the awesomeness of you, the GM. And so figure out something that's going to play to your strengths. And if you are a great embodier of NPCs, then make sure that your villain gets to do a proper rant or a vamp or whatever. Make sure that there's a big moment for you to shine in that. And then if the game is about going insane, make sure that half the players will go insane in the fight. Just really amp up those stability losses. If the game's about vampires, someone has to get their throat torn out and their blood spattered across the wall. Don't worry. Oh, if I do this, the players will be mad. No, the players literally signed up to a horror game at a convention. They want to die or go insane or be eaten, but they want it to be really colorful and exciting and loud. And that's or not loud necessarily if it's a subtle sort of a story, but they want it to feel like the concentrated version of that game. And so make sure that you're giving that to them. A game that's just okay, they could get that at home. What you want them to do is say, man, I can't wait till next Origins or whatever so that I can play with you again. That was amazing. And then they go back and they have nothing but good feelings about you and about the game. You're the one night stand for them. Do stuff they can't get at home.
For convention games specifically, the key to convention gaming is the fact it's time slot. You have 3 or 4 hours, whatever. And you need to have a satisfying conclusion in that time. So what I always include, if it's a fairly linear investigation, then I'll have a couple of scenes in there which I can either drop in or take out, depending on where I'm in the clock. If the players are going through too quickly, I'll have this extra subplot I can drop in, or just this oh, there is a bunch of bad guys you got to beat up before you can get to the big boss for the final scene, to soak up some time. If it's a sandbox investigation, if I'm expecting the players to actually do some deduction, or they can go in lots of directions, the thing to really avoid there is a situation where you're coming up to the end of the convention slot and the players are not only lost on what's going on, but are completely off track from getting to the climax. So what I try and include in scenarios is about 45 minutes before the end, there'll be some event that basically shoves them over to a place where there'll be a satisfying conclusion. They mightn't know precisely what's going on, and they might have the tools to get the good outcome, but there'll be a climactic final scene. So, for example, if the scenario is you've got to find, this guy's been murdered, you got to find his killer, then the final scene is going to be either some innocent person being accused of being the killer if the players can't prove their innocence, as opposed to, okay, guys, it's 10 o'clock now, we're finishing up, and you've the killer has you've driven off in a car 2 hours ago, and you guys are still wandering around looking poking dead bodies. So have something that will bring the game to a satisfying conclusion.
And just one last thing as well related to what Gar was saying there. Another thing that Gar has, which I think is particularly useful for convention adventures, is if you have a set of pre-gens, make a note of which pre-gens have what abilities or what pieces of the puzzle, because you don't want to end up with 5 players at your table taking the 5 characters and leaving the 6th character that has the psychic powers that solve the whole plot or whatever. So be sure that you've got the right characters that you need. Know which pre-gens you actually need in that adventure, and bring them in.
And for the love of Pete, be prepared to redistribute skills at the beginning of a game, because you go to a con game, 6 people have showed up, 4 people show up, you know, it's really a toss up. And so if you want to have balanced characters and you want to be prepped for 6 people, you have to be able to handle that only 2 show up. And I had that go really well once, but yeah, just being prepared to rebalance on the fly is really, really important.
We have if this was a convention, we'd be thrown out of the room, but it's not. And we have one question remaining in our hands up list, and that's Michael Kewell.
Hi.
Attention, dragon meeting attendee.
Neil, a simple question, or maybe not. How many suspects? I ask because I'm aware that I only ever tend to write one real suspect, and the problems they have finding out what's going on are complicated enough without them having, all right, who exactly is doing this evil thing. But given constraints of conventions and campaign play, how many suspects do you like to have, and how many can they handle?
People can't keep track of any number larger than 5. That's just true. So that should be your upper limit. And then the story can constrain you. Is it like, which of these 2 twin sons was the murderer? Then you have 2 suspects. They're the twins. One of them's the murderer. And if you're feeling fancy, it's actually their stillborn triplet who's haunting them as a ghost who did it. But whatever, right?
Actually, I think when I saw that on Columbo, it was both of them.
Mm-hmm, right. So you'll let the story constrain you. 5 should be your upper limit, and that's actually a little high. I would say if you've got 3, you can pat yourself on the back and say, I'm done for the day. And often the story will only require 2. And sometimes it will only be 1, and it'll be like Columbo, in which Columbo knows who did it from walking in. He just has to figure out how to pin it on the guy. And maybe that's your story. But 7 Columbos, all of them trying to pin it on one guy, is a little bit of a bear baiting dramatically. So I would say maybe, the Columbo structure is better for 1-to-1 or for a smaller group of players than it is for a standard, big mess of gamer party scenario.
I think some of it has to do with your setting. I have done, I think, 5-ish, which was in Murder Sub Rosa, which is essentially I adapted the idea of a house mystery. Like, someone in this house is guilty, but there's all these people in this house, they're all together. And in that case, I think it works. It seems to work because you are slowly eliminating suspects, and as you're doing it, you're learning more about the other people. So that the process of eliminating suspects is also the process of learning more about your other suspects and everything that's going on. And I've never used that many in a written scenario or anything else really ever before or since. And so I think just being aware of your format, because if you're at a house party mystery, it's kind of boring if you've got one. Like, part of the point of a house party mystery is, oh my gosh, there's servants, there's old people, there's young people, there's all these people here together.
Oh no, Tobin, the servants are all above suspicion. It couldn't possibly be.
So yeah, I would say, like, be aware of your setting, but if they are like that, then it really has to be fairly claustrophobic in keeping the suspects together.
My advice, like you, I don't think there's necessarily an upper limit, but the more you add, then the more tools you need to give to the players to remember who's who. So, for example, if you're doing a murder mystery at a dinner party, then maybe there's a list of invitations, and you give that as a handout to the players, going, here is the list of 12 names at this dinner, and they can start crossing them out and marking them off. If they're meeting a large number of NPCs in the start of the scenario where you're establishing your list of suspects, then be very, very blatant with the hats. This guy is the priest. He talks in a priestly voice. This guy is very, very different to the next. They all are their own unique things. As opposed to here are the 6 college professors who happen to be here. Or if you do that, then here is the professor of theology. Here's the professor of history. Here's the professor of geology. Make them all as distinct as you can. Because players don't remember names, because GMs don't remember names. If you introduce Bob, Phil, and Jim to them, they're going to go, who's who, which what? But if you go this is, I don't know, Theodore, Ming Chien, and Abdul, they're going to go, all right, okay, we can track those more easily.
One thing about creating additional suspects is that the players, of course, will do that for you. And the primary way to get the players to decide that someone is the bad guy is to portray them as completely innocent and innocuous. And by doing those two things, that will, and this is not something you're doing on purpose, because if you do it on purpose, it won't work. But if you're just trying to get them to move off from this person who's maybe they're the victim or what have you, that the players will decide who they think the suspect is, and it will often be quite different than you think. And I've had the opposite thing happen too, which is I once did a scenario where I said, well, I'm going to have the villain tell you right up top in the very first scene that they're the villain. And the mystery in this one is stopping them and the other villains from doing whatever horrible thing they've always obviously come to town in order to do. And the players, again, oh, well, that's obviously the victim that we have to protect. So in general, the whole question of red herrings is that the players will take care of the confusion for you. And as we already mentioned in answer to an earlier question, in the unlikely event that they immediately seize on the actual antagonist, then the mystery just shifts to, well, then how do we stop them, given the fact that they have a rocket grenade pointed at the president, or whatever it is that they have that you then have to do to defeat them. Well, I think that that pause sounds a climactic note. So we'd like to thank everybody for coming out and posing your questions and hanging out with us in our series of virtual panels. Pelgrane is going to continue to do these. Next week is going to be a monster building panel for 13th Age. Then we're going to come back and do a one-to-one GMing masterclass, so we can drill in to the secrets of running for one player and one GM, as in GUMSHOE one-to-one. And we'll be announcing other panels as we go along. So if you want to join the Pelgrane Discord server and haven't done so already, that's the way to get your top secret invitations to take part in the panels. And on that note, I would like to thank all of our panelists and everyone else for coming and participating. And in these times, it's great to see everybody's faces and to hear from folks. So thanks a lot, everybody.